Welcome back to the Running Wine Mom podcast. I'm your host, Samantha Cieslinski, aka the Running Wine Mom. Today, we have a treat for all the thriller enthusiasts out there. We're diving deep into the world of suspense, mystery, and psychological thrillers with a brilliant author who's been making waves in the literary scene. She's the New York Times, USA Today, and internationally best-selling author of not one, but two gripping novels that have left readers on the edge of their seats. Her debut novel, A Flicker in the Dark, was a finalist for numerous awards, and her latest release, All the Dangerous Things, has been earning accolades and praises from critics and readers alike. But that's not all. Our guest today has another book, Only If You're Lucky, set to release in January, and we can't wait to get a sneak peek into what promises to be another page turner. So pour yourself a glass of your favorite wine, settle in, and get ready for a riveting conversation as we sit down with the incredible Stacy Willingham. We explore her writing process, the dark and complex worlds she creates, and the secrets behind crafting mind-bending thrillers that keeps us up all night. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited. As I was just saying, I loved both of your books, got
Thank
through them
you.
so quickly. So I'm so excited to talk about them and your upcoming book as well. But
Thank you.
before we get into that, to start each episode, we have our Wine, and Win of the Week segment. This is where we share our favorite bottle of wine about something that's been bothering us and celebrate our recent victories. So grab a glass, take a deep breath, and let's get started. What is your wine, W-I-N-E, of the week?
All right, I'm going to say my wine of the week is a new Cabernet that I tried last weekend called Postmark in Paso Robles, California. It's the first time I've ever had it, but it was fantastic, and I drank like almost the whole bottle by myself. So,
Then that's a good one.
yeah.
And what's your W-H-I-N-E of the week?
So I'm going to say my WHINE wine and my win of the week are kind of the same thing, but my wine turned into a win, which is great. So I'm currently writing my fourth book, and I have
Ooh.
been slogging through writer's block lately. And it's not so much writer's block as like I just can't. I've had a really hard time getting around this one bump in the story, and I finally got over the bump today. So
That's awesome.
thank you. So I'm going to say my wine of the week has been writer's block with this fourth book, but my win of the week is finally getting over the writer's block today.
Well, I am excited. As I'm excited to hear that you have a fourth book. That's awesome.
I do. Yes, I
do. And so I always like to ask my guests, what is one struggle you've overcome leading to where you are now? And what is one thing that you're most proud of in life?
Oh man. So one struggle I would say is I know you've talked to a lot of authors on your podcast and you've probably heard this over and over again, but the world of publishing and getting published is really a tough battle, and it's filled with a lot of rejection, a lot of self-doubt. And A Flicker in the Dark, my debut, has been really, more successful than my wildest dreams, but it took about 7 years to get there. And
Wow.
yeah, and it's my first published book, but it's not the first book I've ever written. I wrote another book before Flicker that I was never able to get published. I couldn't even get an agent for it. And I got over 100 agent rejections over the course of 5 years before I finally gave up on that book and switched over to A Flicker in the Dark. So I would say the biggest struggle is just kind of getting my foot in the door and not giving up. But I think that's also the thing I'm most proud of, is not giving up and being able to turn this passion and this hobby of mine into my career. It's a dream come true.
That's amazing. And that is something similar to pretty much all of the authors that I've
Yeah.
spoken to. You kind of think, oh, you'll be 22 with this debut novel, living in a big city, like kind of Hallmark movie-esque.
Yeah.
And every single one of them has been like, we worked so hard to get to where we are. And I just think that takes so much dedication and mental perseverance, which is awesome.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, you hear those stories, of course, of people who like have their very first book published, or every agent they send it to wants it. And I do know I consider myself pretty lucky because my debut did have a lot of success. But yeah, there's this behind the scenes grind that readers don't see. And so every time you get to get together with another author and kind of swap stories, it's always fun because you realize no matter how successful someone is and how much you admire and look up to their work, we all kind of have a similar background of just having to wade through the rejections and not give up to finally get to where we are.
Yeah, the no's are like definitely something that are not for the weak, I guess. So that's
Yeah.
something you should be really proud of.
Yeah. In a
Um,
way, it does. Oh, sorry. I was going to say,
no,
in a
no,
way,
no, go ahead.
it does kind of prepare you a bit for when you're published, though, because something I have noticed is the rejection never quite stops. I mean, you're even once you're published, some readers love your book, some readers
Mhm.
don't. And so those reviews are kind of a form of mini rejection in and of itself. And so the whole process, thickens your skin a bit. So once you finally are published, you can handle that stuff a little easier.
Yeah, I'm sure that's like super hard to hear because I found your book through recommendation of people who I'm in the Peloton Mom Book Club, and
Yeah.
then I also just joined another one about I think psychological thrillers because I love that genre, and
Yeah.
well, that's how I get all my books. It's mostly all positive, which is good. But
Hmm.
then you do always think of all the books that people recommend. There's always someone in there that like, oh, that
Yeah.
wasn't for me. Like, just keep scrolling,
Yeah, yeah, but books are subjective, which is part of the reason
Yeah,
why it's so hard to get published in the first place because you have to
right.
find that one agent who and that one editor who loves it, and yeah, it's an art form. No one's ever gonna love everything they come
Right.
across.
All right. So this is the Running Wine Mom. I like to start
Mhm.
with a little fitness. What is your favorite way to stay active?
So it's funny you just mentioned the Peloton Moms Book Club. I used to be an avid Orange Theory girl, and I do love Orange Theory. I miss it sometimes, but I think I found a couple of years ago once I started working from home and being self-employed that I needed to do something different every day just to kind of break up the monotony of working out. And I found that doing something different is what I need to do. So I have a Peloton. I do a Peloton a couple times a week. I play tennis. I do yoga and hot Pilates. I jog. So as long as I'm doing something every day, that I usually feel good, and I try not to do the same thing 2 days in a row.
Yeah, I've never done Orange Theory. I've done like so many Orange Theory-esque type
Hmm.
things, but I don't think I've ever done an Orange Theory class, but I know people like love them so much.
Yeah,
Uh,
they're fun. They're intense, but
yeah.
they're fun.
That's the thing that I always say I love about Peloton is like there is so many like they have boot camps that are I guess similar to
Yeah,
Orange Theory, but like this morning I did a lifting one. Yesterday I did an outdoor run. It's like you can do all different like things,
yeah,
which is nice. That's
yep,
the way I am too. I'm like I can't do the same thing every single day.
yeah, yeah. I'm the same way.
So how do you stay motivated to maintain your own fitness routine?
For me, I feel like I've been trying to focus over the last couple years more on how I feel, like feeling
Hmm.
energized, feeling healthy, feeling like mentally clear. Again, I'll go back to I'm a full-time writer now, which means I work from home and I'm by myself, pretty much just staring at my computer and in my own head for like 8+ hours at a time. And if I don't get some activity in, I
Hmm.
find it really starts to affect my mental clarity. So,
Right.
yeah, so for me, it's all about like if I just start to feel that fog like descend over
Hmm.
my mind, I'm like, all right, it's time to get a little activity in, and it always makes me feel better.
Yes. And what struggles do you have to stay healthy and fit?
Just like everyone, my motivation kind of waxes and wanes. There's some
Yeah.
days where I just really don't feel it, and I try to give myself a little grace and maybe just take my dog for a walk or something on those days, or just not do anything at all. That's fine too. Yesterday, I spent the majority of the day on the couch because that's what Sundays are for.
That they
And
are.
yeah, also say my job is very deadline driven, and so sometimes I do find that I feel guilty like standing up from my computer to take an hour for myself because I
Mhm.
feel like I should be working instead. But it kind of goes back to that knowledge of my work will be better if I can get outside and get some movement in. So I try to
Mhm.
keep that in mind when I feel guilty about it, and I feel the motivation waning.
Yeah, I just read something about like if you do even like a 30-minute workout a day, it's a very small percentage of your day, and then maybe like 3% of your day, which means out of the whole week, when you add it all up, it's such a small percentage of your week to be better, just say like 97% of the time by getting
Yeah.
in that 30 minutes a day is so
Yeah.
important.
It is
Um,
crazy how much of a small, just like to your point, 30 minutes makes such a big difference for me.
It really does. I like last week. was not on my regular fitness regimen, and I was going bonkers. It was like
Yeah.
so wildly noticeable.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I
Oh,
get it.
I will say too, so you mentioned challenges. I've also been, I noticed the older I get, the more I get injured, like doing
Yeah.
the smallest little things. And I've been dealing with a tweaked lower back for the
Oh
last like
no.
month. Yeah. And, and so my workouts have been less intense lately than they have been because I'm trying to stay active, but I'm trying not to aggravate it. I'm trying to heal, and
Right.
I've noticed too that I'm going crazy. It's like I can't push myself the way I normally can, and it's making me feel so just like antsy, internally antsy.
Yes, I get that. It's like you can't do what you want to do, but
Mm-hmm.
you can't or you won't be able to do that again.
Right, right.
So I guess that kind of my next question was going to be about your relationship between mental health and physical fitness, but I think you kind of like hit that on the head that it's so important for,
Yeah.
your mindset.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's get into some personal stuff and about your book. So I just
Okay.
saw on your Instagram you were just inducted into the University of Georgia's 40 Under 40.
Yes.
Congrats. How
Thank
did
you.
that make you feel? That's such a great achievement.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, that was amazing. I mean, I graduated in 2013, so this is actually
Okay.
my 10-year anniversary, I guess, of graduating from college. And yeah, it was pretty surreal, to be honest, to be back there. On the one hand, it doesn't feel like I've been out of college for 10 years, but on the other
Yeah.
hand, in a lot of ways, it does.
Yeah.
Being back on campus and seeing how much it's changed. But yeah, it was amazing. I mean, a lot of really wonderful things happened to me at UGA, and well, I'm sure we'll get into this later. But my third book that's coming out in January is a college campus thriller.
Ooh.
Inspired by the house that I lived in at UGA when I was a student there. So it was
Oh,
a pretty full circle moment to be back and kind of get that award and just think about how much has changed in the 10 years since I graduated.
that's so cool. That's awesome. Congratulations. What a
Thank
great
you.
accomplishment.
Thank
So my
you.
next thing is you are based in Charleston,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
My aunt and uncle moved to Mount Pleasant like 4 or 5 years ago. So I've been down
Yeah.
like a few times and I'm like, I have to ask, what is your favorite restaurant? Because I get so
Oh,
overwhelmed every time I go down there. I'm like, I don't know which one to go to. We have so
yeah.
many.
I get overwhelmed too. I've lived here on and off for over 20 years now.
Wow.
And I still get overwhelmed. The food here is phenomenal. We're
So
very
good.
spoiled. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I will say I think my go-to recommendation when anyone asks is a restaurant called Our Kitchen. Have you heard of it?
Okay. I don't know if I don't think we were there before.
They're kind of like a hidden local gem, which is why I like to recommend it, because they
Hmm.
call themselves, it's on Rutledge. So Our
Okay.
Kitchen is short for Rutledge Kitchen. And they say they're a kitchen, not a restaurant. So it's very
Oh,
intimate. It's very small. They only have two seatings a night, and it's
wow.
maybe 15, 20 people in the restaurant at a time.
Oh,
Um,
that's so
yeah,
cool.
and the menu changes every day. The chefs like go to the farmers market in the morning, get all the
Oh my
fresh
God.
food, make the menu that morning, and then serve you a 5 course meal in the evening. And the food is fantastic, and it's just a really intimate, cool experience.
I am definitely going to be going there when I
Yeah,
go back
it's
again because
you
that's
really
right up
you,
my alley.
it's so good. You can't go wrong. You never get the same meal twice. I've been there
Yeah.
so many times, and it's always so good.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, we went
Mhm.
we went to Husk. I
Oh
know the
yeah,
one time, which was so good. And then one of my other favorite things was on top of the Dewberry at the cocktail bar. It
yes,
overlooks the whole city, which was really nice. But like
yeah.
I I also loved Isle of Palms so much and Shem Creek were just so fun when we got to visit those. So I love
Yeah.
it down there so much.
Yeah, 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 me too. I mean, it's neat. There's a lot of different, I guess, like any city, a lot of different boroughs, so you can go
Yeah.
to all the different beaches that have a different vibe to them. And
Mhm.
Shem Creek has a very different vibe. Downtown has a different vibe. So it's depending on whatever mood you're in, you can kind of get it all here, which I love.
Yes, I was like so excited to see that you lived there. I was like, oh, I love that
Mm,
town so much.
yeah. I grew
Um,
up in Mount Pleasant. So,
oh, okay. That's
yeah.
yeah. It was, I mean, it's really cool there. It's like so central to, I mean, they're so close to Isle of Palms and then to
Yeah.
Charleston. And they're always at different restaurants and bars and having so much fun. So
I
it's a
know.
good
It's a
place.
fun city.
So how about you tell the listeners, how did you first get into writing?
Yeah, sure. So I've always loved writing from as early as I can remember, really, when I was a kid. Well, funny enough, my
Mhm.
sister is a couple years older than me, and we were kind of attached at the hip when we were growing up. And she went to school before I did, obviously, since she was older. And when she came home from school, she would sit me down and teach me everything that she had learned that day and kind of just like
Oh,
play school with me. Yeah.
yeah.
And so she taught me how to read and write when I was really young. And I have loved it ever since. So we used to write like little short stories and screenplays together when we were kids. And then in high school, I joined my high school newspaper and really fell in love with like interviewing people and learning their stories and finding a unique way to tell their stories. So I thought I wanted to be a journalist and went to UGA to study magazine journalism. And I loved it. I love journalism and I still do. But when I graduated, I had a hard time finding a job at a magazine. So I got into advertising. I started working as a copywriter. And I did like social media marketing and things like that. And I was doing freelance journalism on the side and kind of created like a little side business of just writing these feature articles and selling them for various magazines. And I realized that the one thing that I always noticed is that my articles were always going way over my allotted word count, and my editors were slashing all the like really flowery descriptive language. And they were like, this is beautiful, but there's just not enough room on the page. Like, it's just too long.
Right.
And so I started thinking that maybe creative writing was what I wanted to do and not just hard journalism. I loved writing long form articles, like really, really long descriptive articles. So one day, I think I was 22 maybe when I sat down and decided to start writing a book just to see if I would enjoy it. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I found that I loved it. And I would come home from work every day and work on it in my bedroom in my apartment. And I didn't tell a soul what I was doing, didn't tell my roommate, didn't tell anyone. I was just like so self-conscious about it. And eventually I just realized I really loved it and I wanted to learn more. So I went to grad school and I kept my job in Atlanta. So I went to grad school at night. I did night classes and weekend classes and online classes. And my idea was that I would turn in that book that I was started writing as my thesis. So I would have 3 years to get it done, and I would have a whole team of thesis advisors to, read it and critique it and tell me what to do next. And yeah, and I did that. So I wrote that book in 3 years, and my thesis advisors loved it, and they said, I think you have a good shot at getting this published. But like I had told you previously, I then spent several years getting rejected by 100 agents, and that book never did get published. But it was my practice novel, which eventually
Mhm.
led to the idea of A Flicker in the Dark. So that's how I got my start.
So was that book a psychological thriller as well, or was it
Yes.
totally
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
It was very different than the books that I've had published in terms of the how it was written and the setting and stuff like that. But yeah, it was a psychological thriller.
Yeah. And that was kind of going to be like what my next question is, like what draws you to that thriller genre and like those themes?
Yeah, I've always loved both scary stories and psychology, and I feel like thrillers combine those perfectly.
Hmm.
I took an abnormal psychology class when I was in college, and I find just the whole concept of like nature versus nurture and decision making and the concept of like psychopaths and sociopaths and
Hmm.
why people act in the ways they do. I've always been interested in that. And so I like to combine that element with just kind of like something creepy that keeps people on the edges of their seats. I was, I mentioned growing up loving reading and writing, but I was also raised on I watched a lot of like Columbo and Alfred Hitchcock and The Twilight Zone
Mm.
with my parents when I grew up. So I think that's just kind of been baked into me from an early age.
So I just saw something and it was a meme of did you ever watch Harriet the Spy when you were
Oh
younger?
yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
it was like if you don't know who this is and you say you're into true crime, like you don't even know or something. And I was cracking up. So I'm like, oh my gosh, that's, that's probably where it started. My love for it was with Harriet the Spy or, um,
I remember even having, when I was a kid, a notebook like her. And do you
mhm,
remember the way she used to label the corners? And I did the
yeah.
exact same thing, and I would write down my observations. So it probably did start with that.
And also in your books, you have strong, complex female characters. How do you approach creating them, especially, in the female protagonist sense?
So I hope my books always have a propulsive plot and twist endings and stuff like that. But for me, I find my books are mostly character driven.
Hmm.
And I think the reason for that is because, for me at least, in my personal opinion, the thing that makes a book really propulsive and something that sucks me in, and a book that makes me care, is a protagonist that feels human and real. And so I
Hmm.
try to first start with my characters. A Flicker in the Dark, All the Dangerous Things, and Only If You're Lucky always kind of started with this big idea in this character at the center. And before I even get started, I try to put myself in that main character's shoes and flesh them out completely, which means I give them a family, I give them a backstory, which usually involves some kind of childhood trauma that they're trying
Yeah.
to work out. They have goals and motivations and flaws and everything that a real person has. And then I try to just keep that in mind the whole time I'm writing. So everything that they do, everything that they say is always tied into what that key motivation is, what they went through when they were younger, what they're trying to accomplish at the root of the story. And in terms of making them female, I think just that old adage, right, which I'm a female 30 something. So thus far, all my main characters have been female 30 somethings, except for my third book features a bunch of teenagers, which is a little different. But
Okay.
it's just easier to kind of inject your own personal
Yeah. Right what you know.
feelings. And
Yeah.
exactly, you're right, what you know. So
That's awesome. And then also, you do always try to have twisty plots. How do you go about figuring those? Do you know that from the beginning, or do you kind of along the way there?
yeah, a little bit of both. So I'm definitely a pantser, which you've talked to enough authors by now. I'm sure you know the difference between plotters and pantsers. But I'm not a big outliner. I don't plot. I've tried to do that before, and it just never really worked out for me. But I have a big idea. Well, I kind of call my big idea. So for example, A Flicker in the Dark, the big idea was, what would it be like to be the daughter of a serial killer, and what would you do if his crimes started happening again? For All the Dangerous Things, it was, what would it be like to be trapped inside the mind of a sleep deprived mother who was desperately searching for her missing son? It's kind of just like something I can sum up in a sentence. But what makes me interested enough in that big idea to spend the next couple years of my life on it is the twist. And so as soon as that big idea, I have my big idea, I have my main protagonist, I've been thinking about them for months. I'm learning who they are and who's in their life and what their family looks like. And eventually I come up with the twist. And if the twist is really good and satisfying and lends itself to like the themes that I want to explore, that's what makes me decide to sit down and actually write the book. But everything in the middle, I don't know. I have no idea what's going to happen. So it's kind of this like terrifying moment of sitting down and staring at an empty Word doc and being like, okay, I'm on word one and I know
Yeah.
what's going to happen on word 100,000, but like what's going to happen in the
What's
middle?
yeah.
And then the process is just kind of figuring out all the twists and turns that get me to the ultimate one.
Yeah. I feel like if I were a writer, that's how I would probably have to do it. I feel like I'd get too confused with all the plots. Like, give me the beginning, give me the end, and then I could fill
Yeah.
everything else in.
Yeah, so many other writers, I'm just always in awe of hearing their the way they outline and the way they
Mhm.
plot. But for me, I come up with all the details and the micro twists, if you will, as I go. I
Mhm.
find I just kind of write without direction, and then eventually a character will say something or do something, or something in the setting will stand out to me, and then I'll realize it's significant, and then that'll lead to another little subplot or something like that.
Mhm.
And I've never been able to sit down and outline that. I always have to write it for it to reveal itself to me. It's fascinating to me the way different authors work and how it's all personal
I was interviewing the author of Hidden Pictures, and he was saying that he used to do the plot. He used to do the plots, and he's like, then he
Yeah.
started the beginning and the end, and he's like, I could have saved myself 7 years, like if I would have
Yeah.
just done that from the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, I love Hidden Pictures. That book's fantastic. But yeah, I do find when I try to meticulously outline, I just am, it drives me nuts. And then when I sit down to start writing, the book vastly changes from the outline anyway. So then I'm like, well, that was a waste of
That
time.
was a waste of time, yeah.
Yeah.
So are there any authors or books that like have had a significant impact on your writing or inspired you into the thriller genre besides Twilight Zone and Alfred
Yeah,
Hitchcock?
yeah. Gosh, so many different authors have inspired me, but I'll say the main ones that come to mind are in high school, I read Truman Capote's In Cold Blood,
Hmm.
and that was the book that made me want to be a writer. Really, back then, I wanted to be a journalist, but I remember thinking that something like that would be really cool to write some kind of true crime book.
Hmm.
And I still think that would be really cool. But that In Cold Blood and Truman Capote was the real true inspiration that led me to want to do this as a career. And then Gillian Flynn has also been a huge inspiration for me.
Hmm.
Her books, I think, just are the perfect example of a thriller that is a page turner, but it's also just so gorgeously written.
Hmm.
She's really, really managed to weave like just descriptive writing and beautiful prose with a fast-paced plot, which is really hard to
Yeah.
do. And yeah, so I constantly look up to her. And Stephen King's On Writing is another book that I read. I love his fiction, but that book On Writing, it's kind of a memoir slash like how to write
Okay.
book, which is
Oh,
yeah, it's very good, and it's very inspiring as a
as a writer.
as
Yeah.
a writer. Yeah, it's really good.
That's awesome. They're all great. All
Yeah.
right, so let's get into A Flicker in the Dark. First of all, how did it feel to have your debut novel receive so many awards and the recognition that it got?
I mean, it was great, of course. It was fantastic. I feel like you have to, authors always kind of joke that you have to have like some, at least some sort of like delusional hope in yourself in order to keep writing for so many years without any payoff. Like you have to be a
Yeah.
little delusional and hope that what you're writing is actually any good with
Yeah.
zero external evidence. So I was hoping that it was good, and I felt like it was good, and I was like I think this could get published, but I had didn't even let myself, my wildest dreams didn't even go to where what has actually happened with it. So it's yeah, it's incredible, and I can't even believe
That's
it sometimes.
amazing. Oh yeah, that has to just be like such a high. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
So this book, it explores the long-lasting impact of a traumatic event on the main character, Chloe. Can you
Mhm.
share, you shared a little bit earlier about like, the psychological aspects of it, but why specifically like the psychological aftermath of a crime?
Yeah, so I'm always interested in well, I guess I can talk a little bit about the inspiration behind A Flicker in the Dark if that'll help. I watched a documentary one time about serial killers because I've always been
Mhm.
interested in true crime and in psychology and the psychology of crime. And there was a picture that came up on the screen of Dennis Rader. It's just that picture just really had an effect on me because they were in a church where Dennis Rader served as a deacon for years. And it's the most intimate moment of this woman's life, having her dad walk her down the aisle at her wedding. And at that point in time, he had brutally tortured and murdered several people, and nobody knew, including her. And
Mhm.
at the time, I was planning my own wedding, so it kind of had me thinking about that really special, intimate moment with your dad and what it would be like if you found out that your dad was not who you thought he was,
Mhm.
and if you looked back on a seemingly happy childhood and realized it was all a cover up or a lie. And then I wanted to know, what would your future look like then if you had to grapple with that, how that would affect your whole life. It would affect your
Mhm.
ability to form relationships, your ability to trust anyone and trust yourself. It would affect what kind of job you went into, who you would ultimately marry. I mean, just so many, it would affect everything, whether or not you wanted it to. So that picture was kind of the spark for A Flicker in the Dark. And then I just wanted to get into the mind of that point of view, the daughter of a serial killer, and see how that childhood trauma would follow her around everywhere she went.
And do you think that contributed to her becoming a psychologist?
Yeah, so I did. In my mind, I wanted her to be, you mentioned there's a kind of a lot of strong female protagonists in my book,
Hmm.
and I wanted her to be strong. I wanted her to be smart. I didn't want her to be like this damsel in distress. But
Hmm.
also, that is such a major trauma to go through. It would take a lot of time to be okay after that, and I don't know if you would ever fully be
Hmm.
okay after that. I mean, I could be wrong. I've obviously never gone through something quite that traumatic before. But I thought it would be really neat, this idea of, this little girl who went through something really traumatic, and people tried to fix her. She went to therapists, she went to psychiatrists and psychologists, and nobody was kind of able to fix her. So she kind of just threw the book at it and tried to fix
Hmm.
herself. She learned everything she could about trauma and grief, and went at it from like an intellectual standpoint. But I think there's a line in the book itself, like, you can't really throw a textbook at trauma. It
Hmm.
doesn't really work that way. But it's funny, I talked to a lot of therapists and mental health professionals in doing research for the book, and a lot of them said that they went into that profession because they went through something traumatic. So I think that's kind of a somewhat common situation.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like I feel like in with psychologists and psychiatrists and even like social workers, I feel like a lot of
Hmm.
people do that because of like something that affected them earlier.
Yeah.
Like in the same realm of that, like did you feel like it was important that she like didn't take her own advice all the time for
Yeah, I did. I mean, I guess there's two things about that I find interesting. One is that I find that there's certain people in life, like doctors or therapists or lawyers, like people who we as citizens of society look at and trust and assume know, kind of have their shit together, and
Yeah, no,
like
yeah.
you're telling me like how to be healthy, you're telling me laws, you're telling me, what to do with my mental health, and we kind of hope that they have it together, but at the end of the day, they're just humans and they have
Yes.
problems too. And like I said, I talked to a lot of therapists and people in mental health who always said, I can spend all day listening to other people's problems, but then I'll go home at the end of the day and cry about my own because I don't know how to
Hmm.
handle it. And it's just, we're humans at the end of the day. So I found that interesting, putting her in a profession where you would hope and you would think that she knows, she has the tools to handle her own trauma and her own grief, but it's so much easier to give advice to other people than it is to accept it yourself.
Yes, it
And I have,
is.
yeah, I also, I have such a great group of girlfriends who we're very open with each other, and we kind of talk about our days and what's bothering us. And it's funny, I find like when I hear them, I'll just spout out all the solutions.
Mhm.
But then when it's my turn to complain, I'm like, none of that's applicable. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just,
You guys don't
it's
know
all
what you're talking about.
exactly. So I think that's just kind of a common practice to
Yeah.
not be able to take your own advice, or maybe not think or act rationally when something big is happening to you.
Yes, I totally agree with that. So just a random thing for the Flicker in the Dark. I loved that there was lightning bugs or fireflies, as some people call it.
Hmm.
I know this is probably dumb, but I didn't know if it was just like regionalized to the Philadelphia area where I am, or like because
Yeah.
I feel like some you don't see them everywhere. But anyway, was there any reference to the name of the book with with the lightning bugs?
Yeah.
Like, was there any reference to that?
So
Or
funny enough, the lightning bugs and that like symbolism came first, and then the title
hmm
came later. So the book had originally, the working title for A Flicker in the Dark was The Shadows, which was always just a working title. But my publishers found a fun way to kind of incorporate it into the tagline after we changed the title. They made it Some Shadows Never Disappear, which was kind of fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
love that. Yeah.
yeah, and but when it was time to come up with the title, I wanted something that was kind of eerie, kind of gave the sense of being just kind of in the dark, but I didn't want
Mm-hmm.
it to be, I didn't want like fireflies. I didn't want the word in the title. I didn't want it
Right.
to be so literal. So A Flicker in the Dark sounded good to me, and it felt
Yeah.
like it alluded to a variety of different things in the book.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it lent itself quite well, in my opinion, to a cover with the
Yes.
fireflies on it. So yeah, it all
Yes.
kind of, it was pulled from a line at the very end of the book. So
Yeah.
yeah, the book came first, and then the title next.
Okay, yeah, that was what I was gonna say. Did you know, like when you were planning, your stuff, did you have the name first and then, the lightning bugs second?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's always, I have a working title when I write, but so far I'm 0 for 3. So
Oh,
my
all right.
titles always change before the book's published.
Well, let's get into All the Dangerous Things. What was the
Yeah.
original name of that book?
The original title for All the Dangerous Things was Hush Little Baby.
Okay. That
Yeah,
is
because it's
creepy
a,
too.
I thought so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nursery rhyme, a classic nursery rhyme, and so
Yeah.
much of the book takes place in the dark at night.
Yeah.
And of course, it's about a mother searching for her missing son. So it seemed to work, but
Yeah.
yeah, for a variety of reasons, we decided to change it.
Yeah. So what made you decide, to explore that emotional and psychological aspect of the situation of a mother who is not only she's sleep deprived and has
Hmm.
insomnia as well at being a new mother.
Yeah.
That's
There.
terrifying.
I know. I
As a
know.
mom of two kids, it's like so.
I know. Yeah, so there were a few things that kind of were happening simultaneously in my life that led to the idea for All the Dangerous Things. The first, I'll say, I got a 2-book deal with The Flicker in the Dark, so I was on the hook to write a second book, and I had no idea what the second book was going to be. So I was like, okay, I got to figure this out.
Yeah.
And I was 2019, and I read an article. I just kind of happened to stumble across it in the Washington Post, that followed around a man at a true crime conference. And
Okay.
he was not there as an attendee. He was there because his sister had been murdered in a string of unsolved murders in the 80s. And he had essentially dedicated the last 30 plus years of his life trying to figure out what happened to her. And he would travel around to these true crime conferences and get up on stage. And on the one hand, he knew that what he was doing would help, because every time he put himself out there, every time he went on Dateline, every time he went on a podcast, there would be an influx of leads and
Hmm.
interest. And we've all seen, cold cases be solved by these
Hmm.
amateur detectives, and the interest in true crime. But at the same time, there was just this like that he felt
Right.
about potentially exploiting her death, or just getting up on stage and
Hmm.
knowing that these true crime fans, in quotes, they care, but also it's entertainment, and
Hmm.
that is kind of a fine line. So I thought that moral conundrum was really interesting, of being
Hmm.
that guy up on the stage. And that was what led to Isabel, and why in the very first chapter she's up on stage telling the
Hmm.
story of her missing son. So yeah, it started with Isabel and wanting to give her some kind of cold case that
Hmm.
she was deeply, deeply invested in. And I was, thinking as a 30 something woman, what would be the thing that happened to me that would take over my entire life, and it would
Hmm.
be something horrible happening to my child. And I
Hmm.
don't personally have children yet, but I just imagine that would be it. That would be the one thing that would make
For
me just
sure.
drop everything in my life and try to figure out what happened to him. Even, if it caused my relationship to crumble, if it
Hmm.
caused my career to crumble, like that's just the thing I would focus
Right.
all my time on. So yeah, so that was that piece. And then the sleep deprivation piece was kind of another interesting thing that happened simultaneously. On the one hand, I thought that sleep deprivation kind of went well with the new mom
Hmm.
storyline, because Isabel knows what it's like to be sleep deprived and up in the
Hmm.
middle of the night with her baby. On the other side of the spectrum, my husband is a bit of a sleep talker. So, and,
Oh.
and yeah, and I'm a bit of an insomniac.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't have it quite bad as Isabel, but I have a hard time falling asleep, and I stay up pretty late, and my mind is always kind of wandering. And
Hmm.
one night, I was up and my husband was asleep, and he like muttered something really creepy in
Oh
his sleep.
God.
Yeah. And I shook him awake, and I was like, "Why the hell did you say that?" And
Yeah.
he had no memory of it
Oh
whatsoever.
my gosh.
Yeah, so that had me thinking about the differences, sleep disorders, how deep
Right.
sleep and an inability to sleep
Hmm.
are essentially opposites, but they each come with their own slew of problems,
Right.
and what would be worse, essentially. So I gave poor Isabel both of them.
I know. So yeah. Yeah, I have an almost 3-year-old daughter and my son turned 1 in
Mhm.
June. So it's like I totally related to her in the sense of like you're just not sleeping and then it's like, on top of all of that, it was just very much I could feel the poor,
Yeah.
woman's everything.
Yeah.
Um so you talked about Isabel, how she was telling the story of her missing child, and she came and spoke to different crime type events, and then including the true crime podcaster that she befriended, sort of, in a way, I guess, like
Yeah.
started to get to know. Um, I'm someone who listens to true crime podcasts. A lot of people do. And as you kind of mentioned earlier, when you're talking about these stories, people are so enthralled with it because they're like, it's entertaining almost, and
Yeah.
blurring the line of entertainment and like, this is actually something that happened to someone. But anyway, um, what was your thought process around like the true crime podcaster and having that as a big part of the story?
Yeah. On the one hand, part of it had to do with, like you just talked about, I listen to the podcast, I watch true crime documentaries, I read the books, and it's sort of my own like moral grappling. Like I put him in there, put Waylon in the podcast in there sort of as a way to help me sort through my thoughts of, why do I enjoy listening to this stuff? Like, is
Yeah.
it is it exploitative? Is it okay? And I think there's certainly a way to be a true crime consumer, a way to do it that's ethical and that's helpful and that
Yeah.
doesn't tip over into the line of being exploitative. But also, it was interesting to me the thought of Isabel kind of forcing herself to get up on the stage over and over again, and in this very fake and detached way, rehearsed, scripted, this rehearsed and scripted way, telling her story in front of a sea of people. The exact opposite of that is sitting
Hmm.
down with one other person at a dining room table and telling it to him unscripted. And
Hmm.
she was really drawn to that. Isabel didn't want to keep getting up on the stage and subjecting herself to that. And Waylon, in the appearance of him and his pod, way more people than any
Hmm.
individual auditorium could, but in a way that felt more intimate and
Hmm.
casual and not quite as performative.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting because something about a podcast, it's like you and I are just sitting here having a
Right.
conversation, but all kinds of people are going to be listening to it.
Yeah.
And, in a way, it's easier to do something like this than it is get up on a stage.
Yeah. And then you can keep listening. If in 10
Mhm.
years from now, if someone wants to hear the story of, of anyone, it's there.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
it lives forever.
and that honestly was like one of the reasons, not to like kind of, do a divergent. But that was one of the reasons that I like started podcasting. So I wanted to like interview my family members, kind of. I was like, they all have like really cool stories. And then I was like,
Yeah,
wait, I like really like doing this. Let me
yeah,
interview more people.
yeah,
But it's like pretty cool to have, like, especially with my parents, like those recordings will be
mhm.
forever. And my great great grandkids can listen to their
Oh, that's so
stories if
cool.
that's still,
Yeah,
but to go, but the same thing in regards to the true crime podcast or in your book, it's like, you could go, like you said, into a room of 50 people, or you can get it to the whole entire world in
yeah,
just one sitting, which is pretty
yeah.
cool.
One conversation. Yeah, that's awesome that you've recorded your family members
Yeah.
like that. I feel like more people should do that. It's a good
I know
idea.
it. I guess like in the actual moment, I was just thinking like, oh, I'm gonna ask him these questions and that, and then like afterwards, I was like, wait, this is actually like really cool
Yeah,
that I have
yeah,
these forever.
that is really cool.
So yeah, so I also obviously loved the true crime podcast, or
Yeah,
in there type thing.
yeah,
Um, so to kind of just like finish up with All the Dangerous Things with the memory loss and self-doubt. Like, she
Hmm.
obviously is like questioning herself. That's like one of the big themes of the whole, book. How did you kind of like work about crafting that narrative?
Yeah, so with the memory loss and things like that, I love writing an unreliable narrator, and
Hmm.
I love reading unreliable narrators,
Yeah.
and it's fun to write them. And with an unreliable narrator, of course, the reader doesn't know if they can trust the narrator or not. And I like toying with
Hmm.
the idea of the narrator also not knowing if they can trust themselves. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. One, kind of classic way is with substances like alcohol, pills, or
Yeah.
something like that. But another one for me, I thought, was sleep deprivation, because everyone has through that when you're so tired. Like, you hear something and you're like, did that really happen? Or you see
Yeah.
something out of the corner of your eye, or you're just kind of foggy. And I wanted to put Isabel in like this constant state of just like
Constancy.
fog, because and that makes it really hard for her to trust her own memories and instincts. And the second part to your question, for me, it was just a good way to make her doubt herself, but also make other people doubt her.
Yeah.
So the doubting yourself element came to me also, again, because we're dealing with a mother here who's looking for her missing son, and that's
Yeah.
kind of a theme in All the Dangerous Things as well. Of is mothers always kind of blaming themselves and wondering, should I have done something different? Should I have done
Hmm.
something more? And so having this like cloak of uncertainty over everything that has come to Isabel through her sleep deprivation kind of heightened that, I think, her
Hmm.
inability to trust herself.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely very realistic in the sense of like I said, how I would feel as
Yeah.
a mother in her situation. So that was
Oh, thank
awesome.
you.
So let's get into your Only If You're Lucky book. So
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
set to release in January, right?
Yep. January
Um,
16th.
okay, January 16th. Can you give us a sneak peek or some sort of insights to the
Yes,
book?
absolutely. Yeah. So it Only If You're Lucky, I mentioned earlier, it is it's a little bit different than my first two books. So there's some things that readers can come to expect that will be the same. So it's heavy psychological elements, just like my other books.
Perfect.
Yep, it's set in the South. It's got multiple twists. It's pretty setting heavy. But this one is a college campus thriller. So it has a bigger cast of characters, and they're all younger. They're all teenagers. So of course, their motivations and their trials and tribulations are all quite different than a protagonist in her 30s. But it basically is about a girl named Margot who goes away to a small liberal arts school in South Carolina. And she is grieving the loss of her high school best friend who died the summer after their senior year. And because of that, her freshman year, she kind of spends the year in a cocoon, and she doesn't really meet anyone. She doesn't really branch out. And at the very end of her freshman year, a girl named Lucy, who lives on her hall, invites Margot to live with her and two other girls on a house off campus. And Lucy is charismatic. She's charming. There's just something really magnetic about her. And Margot just has to say yes. She has no reason to say no. So she moves into this house, and her and the other three girls become kind of instant best friends, and it's everything she ever wanted when she thought about going away to college. And the girls live in a house owned by and adjacent to a fraternity house, and so
Okay.
the fraternity boys are their landlords. And 6 months into the year, one of the fraternity boys next door is brutally murdered, and Lucy is missing without a trace. So
Ooh.
Margot and the other roommates are kind of left in the dust to deal with the investigation and the aftermath. And yeah, so that's the gist of it. And I mentioned previously, the house is based on the house I lived in college. I actually lived in a house owned by a fraternity in
Oh,
college.
okay. That's cool.
Yes.
I didn't, when you were saying that, I was like, oh, I didn't even know like that was a thing. I didn't know if it was a thing, but now you're saying it is a thing.
Yeah,
So I
I
didn't
don't
know
know.
what,
I don't know if it is truly a thing, but it was a thing for me. So
but it was for
yeah,
you.
yeah. So there's a fraternity at Georgia who owns the house behind their house, and they rent it
Okay.
out. they rent it out every year.
Yeah.
And my friends and I lived in it for 2 years. And so
That's
the
awesome.
fraternity boys were our landlords, and it was a very lawless 2 years, and it was a
That must have
crazy,
been so fun.
yeah, it was. But in hindsight, all kinds of weird stuff
Yeah, I'm
that
sure.
needed to be memorialized in print.
Ye-
So
Oh
yeah,
my gosh, I love that.
it was a really fun book to write. So I'm excited about it.
So did you go back to your like house to like kind of re-get any memories or
Yeah,
just from your first or like
sort
bring up any memories? Sorry, I guess what I was.
I've been back since just to kind of snap some pictures, and
Yeah.
it's still standing, believe it or not. And I haven't been inside yet, but I have so many pictures, from that
Yeah.
time that I can go back and reference. And there's just so many little moments and memories that my
Yeah.
roommates and I will still talk about.
That's
So
so cool.
yeah, I kind of beg people not to jump ahead and read the acknowledgments before they finish the book, because I
Okay.
always stuff my acknowledgments full of spoilers. But I
Yeah.
do tell some true stories of stuff that really happened in
Okay.
that house and the acknowledgments that might,
Oh,
yeah, make the reading experience a little more interesting once people finish
that's
the
so
book. So
cool. Yeah,
yeah.
I will definitely make sure to read them too. 'Cause sometimes I
Mhm.
feel like you might like skip over them if you don't take the extra time 'cause you're so excited at the end and then you're like,
Yeah,
okay,
I
you're
feel
processing the ending. But it's
I
so
love,
important.
maybe it's the writer in me, but I love reading the acknowledgments. I just
Yeah.
find it so interesting to see like what all goes into a book. But
Hmm.
from a writing perspective, I feel like by the time I get to the acknowledgments, there's so much I want to say to the reader. Like,
Yeah.
like, here's inspiration, here's what I
Yeah.
was thinking when I did this. I kind of just like dump it all in the acknowledgments and hope that someone finds it interesting. So
Well, one of the, I don't know if this goes hand in hand, but one of the coolest audiobooks that I listened to was David Goggins, one of David Goggins' books, Can't Hurt Me, I think it was
hmm
called. And he did it kind of in like a podcast version. So he read chapter one, and his was more like stories of how he got to be where he is, but he
hmm
would do chapter one. And then while you're hearing his story, you're like, I have all these other questions for you. And literally he would answer all of those questions at
oh,
the
that's
end
cool.
of the so that's like I feel like that was something that really stuck with me. And I guess that's
Yeah.
similar to the way the acknowledgments are for all of them is like you read about their kids or like their friends or their
hmm
family or like the places, and that is such like a cool aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um
I always just find it so interesting hearing about like how what the inspiration for a story
right.
was and things like that. And so I sprinkle a little bit of that usually in
That's
an
so cool.
acknowledgments or an author's note, just to
Yeah.
let people know how the idea came about.
Yeah, I love that. So there are, lots of murder mystery, missing person books out there. What do you think is something that the readers will really love about it?
Yeah, all right. Well, I hope it stands out.
Well, it
It's
will.
thank you. It's yeah, it's this one, like I mentioned, it's different than my first two, and so I hope that readers enjoy kind of a slightly different take on what a typical Stacy Willingham book has been thus far. I love dark academia. It's kind of a subgenre that I've always loved, like The Secret History, If We
Hmm.
Were Villains, some more recent ones like In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, The It Girl by Ruth Ware, just those
Oh,
types of books where it focuses on young people kind of grappling to find their place in the world, trying to find friendship and community and
hmm.
belonging. But what I find kind of cool about Only If You're Lucky is dark academia is often set in like an Oxford or a Yale or like a
Hmm.
really prestigious kind of like gothic school setting. And Only If You're Lucky is set in a small liberal arts school on the beach. So
Yeah.
it's still kind of the settings that I love to do and the places that I love to write about. And it tells it. I guess it focuses less on the like academic
Right.
experiences and more on the friendship experiences and the communal living and that element of college
Hmm.
life that is so like
Important.
strange and unique to that time of life. So
Yeah. It is when you like think it's like so important, but then when you do like think back on it, you're like, what the heck? This is
I
so
know.
interesting.
I
The
know.
things, yeah,
And those years are just so formative. Like,
they
when
are.
you're 18, 19 years old, you're like clay, and
Hmm.
your friends are everything to you. And
Yeah.
I just it's I've had some early readers tell me, like, minus the murder, it kind of makes them nostalgic, like thinking back
That's
to that
okay.
time in their
Yeah.
lives. So, I hope that readers get something like that out of it, because it was a
Yeah.
nostalgic book for me to write. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, my husband and I, even though he didn't go to my college, he would come visit. We weren't dating, but he had mutual friends, and we always
mhm.
talk about our college. We're like, ugh, what we would do to go back and
Yeah.
just, but we're like also like we don't want to be drinking like natty ice
I
and
know,
sleeping
I
on a
know.
floor.
Yeah, I know. It's funny, like you mentioned going back to UGA. I was just there, and
Yeah.
10 years doesn't seem like a long time until you see kids who are
Yeah.
currently in college, and you're like, whoa, like
You're
it
like,
has
yes,
been a
I would.
long time.
Yes, I could not do that again, but have fun, everybody.
Yeah, I know.
All right. Is there anything that I missed or that you wanted to talk about a little more? Did you want to talk about your fourth book at all?
Yeah, I mean, I guess all I'll say is I'm writing my fourth book. It is early, early, early days, so I can't even give a cohesive synopsis right now,
You know
but
the ending though, right?
I do know the ending. I do. Yep, I know the ending. I'm 30,000 words into it, and I'm limping along to try and get to the ending. But it will be. I'm really excited about it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm super excited about the story. It's again a little different than my first three now, but with a lot of similarities. The
Okay.
setting is pretty cool. I'm excited about that. It's a little bit different than what I've ever done. And it'll be out sometime in 2025. So
Okay.
that's what I'm working
Wow.
on.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so happy for you. And I'm
Thank
so
you.
happy that you have so many things coming up. That's awesome. I'm so excited to read. Only if you're lucky. That
Thank
sounds
you.
so awesome. All right. Well, I guess that's going to bring us to the end of another episode of The Running Wine Mom. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into Stacey's novels, her writing process, and the incredible journey in the literary world. A huge thank you to Stacey for joining us today and sharing her insights, creativity, and passion for crafting stories and keeping us guessing until the very last page. Before we wrap up, don't forget to follow Stacey at Stacy Willingham on Instagram. I'll link it in the show notes. And be sure to grab a copy of her latest book, All the Dangerous Things, available now, and mark your calendars for the release of Only If You're Lucky coming soon in January. I'll also link all that stuff too. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leave a review, and sharing it. You can also follow me on Instagram at @therunningwinemom_. Well, thank you, Stacey. This was so awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it so much.
Yes, like I said, I like fangirled over your book. So like
Thank you.
this is truly the best thing about like me starting this like with two little toddlers. This is like my creative
Oh,
outlet and
yeah.
just like meeting all these amazing, mostly women. I've had some men on, but like
Yeah.
just like badass women. And it's like so cool to see how
That honestly must be
successful
the
these people are.
coolest. To
It's
just read a
really
book and fall in love and be like, I want to talk to that person. And
yeah. And
yeah.
then I'm like, oh, telling my friends, okay, and then you can listen to the like I got to talk to, him or her. So thank you for taking time aside to do this.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
all right. Thank you so much for joining me today. Remember, you are strong, you are capable, and you are all amazing. Until next time, keep running, keep sipping, and keep embracing the joy of motherhood. Cheers, and I will be back next Tuesday.